Unjunk your sleep during Mattress Firm's President's Day sale and wake up a better you. Shop Tempur-Pedic, the most highly recommended bed in America, and save up to $500 on adjustable mattress sets. Plus, get a $300 instant gift good towards sleep accessories. We've got your perfect bed in stock for immediate delivery and with a low price guarantee, so you can rest assured you're getting the best price. Only at Mattress Firm, the #1 Tempur-Pedic retailer. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
Due to the themes of this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Remember, data is the commodity. You're just the product. Lock your doors. Close the blinds. Change your passwords. This is Secrets and Spies. Secrets and Spies is a podcast that dives into the world of espionage, terrorism, geopolitics, and intrigue. This podcast is produced and hosted by Chris Carr.
On today's podcast, I'm joined by Ben West. Ben is from Stratfor, which is a RANE company. And on this podcast, we discuss money laundering and its links to organised crime. And we also take a look at a recent FBI sting operation called Trojan Shield. If you're enjoying this podcast, you can support it in a few ways. First of all, please leave a review on your preferred podcast app. All reviews help us gain more listeners as it raises the awareness of the podcast. I don't know if you know, but all podcast apps are algorithm based, and the more interaction a show gets, the more listeners it attracts. And just a quick shout out to everybody who's left a review so far. There's been some absolutely wonderful and very kind and in-depth reviews left on iTunes and other podcast apps over the last few months. I've really been blown away by some of them. Some have been really super. And thank you so much for taking the time to write those reviews. You can also become a friend of the podcast through Patreon. For £3 a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber and directly support the show. You'll get a free copy of my film, The Dry Cleaner. And on top of that, I will throw in some extras from time to time. One of them in particular will be a behind-the-scenes look at the podcast, and I'm hoping to organise some Zoom drinks soon. If you enjoy this podcast, you may also enjoy my short film, The Dry Cleaner. The Dry Cleaner is my first attempt at original spy fiction, and is now available on Amazon Prime and iTunes. Without further ado, let's get going, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for listening.
The opinions expressed by guests on Secrets and Spies do not necessarily represent those of the producers and sponsors of this podcast.
Ben, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you back on. Just for the benefit of listeners who may not have listened to our previous episode, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional experience?
Yeah. So my name is Ben West. I'm a Senior Global Security Analyst for Stratfor, a RANE company. I've been with them off and on since 2007. In between working at Stratfor, I've gotten my graduate degree at Johns Hopkins at the School for Advanced International Studies, and I've lived all around the world from Central America to Europe, and currently based in Southeast Asia.
Excellent. So today we're going to talk about organized criminal groups and how they exploit financial services and new technology to launder their money. So Ben, maybe this is a silly question, but I like to start with silly questions. Why do criminal organizations have to launder their money?
So no, I think it's a great place to start. So I think it's helpful to think about criminal organizations, especially large ones, the same way we think about legitimate businesses. So you think about legitimate businesses are bringing in revenue from multiple sources, probably storing it in multiple bank accounts, and they have to distribute it out to their employees, pay the bills, take care of all their expenses. They can obviously do that through legitimate banking. There are lots of services that can help them manage that. Criminal organizations obviously have, I think, the same requirements. They are also taking in revenue from different sources. They have to pay their employees, pay their bills. But they can't rely on the kind of the formal economy, the formal services out there that legitimate businesses can, or at least if they do, they do so at a risk of being caught or being flagged by those companies. So criminals basically have to operate parallel financial operations as a way to kind of manage all their money. Cash is obviously that's one of the major forms that the revenue comes in. And I think, if you're just taking in all this cash, if you have literally rooms full of cash, that is not only just unwieldy and inefficient way to store and move your money around, it's also extremely risky. You could be robbed by other criminals. You could lose it. You could have internal theft. I mean, all these same risks that legitimate companies have. And also, I mean, these criminal organizations are international. Payments are often going from one part of the world to another. It's really difficult to move bulk cash internationally for the same reasons I said. So you want to do that either electronically or through these kind of parallel alternate financial vehicles.
Yeah.
I think the ultimate reason why they need to launder their money is that eventually criminal organizations and criminal actors need to use the money, whether that's to buy vehicles, buy property, other luxury items, invest in. And if you ever want to invest in the legitimate market, that money is going to be coming from an unsavory source. And I think when people start making large purchases, you start raising suspicion, you start attracting scrutiny. And if you don't have basically a good cover story for that money, you're at risk at getting investigated and potentially arrested.
Yeah. And organized criminal gangs. I mean, if I remember watching Narcos correctly, Pablo Escobar had to bury his money because he had so much money, and people still find it now. So
I think it's not the first problem that comes to mind, but what to do with all the cash? If you are a successful criminal, what do you do with all the cash? And I think it's an often a common predicament that just because you're good at producing drugs or selling drugs or smuggling drugs from the source where they're produced to the market, that's a totally different skill set from laundering money, and totally different channels, just a different set of expertises. And so we'll talk about some examples later, but it's common that you see, especially in larger criminal organizations, there'll be kind of a separate team that handles money laundering from the rest. And I think that's partly just for operational security, keeping operations divided, but also just because, it does require a different skill set.
You identify 3 stages of money laundering. Can you talk to us about those 3 stages?
The common model for money laundering is placement, layering, and integration.
Yeah.
So placement is basically that's where you have your big piles of cash, and you are putting it in some sort of financial vehicle, whether that's putting into a bank account, or sometimes it might just be buying hard assets. But it's basically it's taking that cash, moving it from cash to some other vehicle that is likely more transferable, easier to manage. The second process is layering, and that's where you're basically, criminals are trying to obfuscate the origin of the money. So that's where you'll see, maybe the money is put into a bank account and then transferred to other bank accounts, transferred to other countries. Maybe exchange for different foreign currencies. Basically, all these extra steps that make it that much harder for investigators to track and kind of figure out what was the provenance of the illicit funds. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. And then finally is integration, and that's where once you feel like the source of your revenue, the illicit revenue, has been sufficiently obfuscated, criminals will then take it out and then basically use it to buy whatever it is they need to buy, and basically treat that money as legitimate funds. And that's a lot of times you see property investment's a big one, because if you have a lot of money, you can buy whole buildings, whole tracts of lands. It's a good way to launder money. Or luxury items such as cars, luxury brands, luxury clothes, things like that, jewelry. Those are common integration.
Mm. And art as well is a big one, isn't it?
Art's a big one because you can kind of hit all 3 in one. You don't necessarily have a lot of. Well, first of all, it's a very subjective subjective call when it comes to the value of a painting. And, you might decide for expediency that this particular piece of art is worth $60 million. That's a good way to, you can give someone the $60 million. It can be very private, not publicly disclosed. And, it's because it's a subjective call on the value of art, it's a little bit easier to defend that it was a legitimate purchase.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that. So can you talk to us then about the sort of tactics used by organized criminal groups to launder their money?
Yeah. So I'll run through. I've listed 5. There are dozens, but these are the 5 I think that are probably most common. What you'll see. The first one is illicit currency exchanges, and this is a really common way, especially if people are moving money across borders. Basically, when you go to the airport and when you cross the border, there's usually a little stand where you can change your money out. You can change your US dollars or Great British pounds for a local currency. The idea is those are very tightly regulated, basically treated as financial institutions. They have limits on how much cash they can transact at any given time. An illicit currency exchange is that just without the regulations and set up to handle tens, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars at a time. When I think of illicit currency exchanges, I remember several years ago crossing the border from Mexico to Guatemala, and there were guys literally standing around with bags full of quetzal, the Guatemalan currency, ready to buy Mexican pesos. And totally unregulated. I'm sure police probably knew they were there. They were probably getting a bribe or a kickback so they could operate. But imagine these guys sitting at the border. That transaction is unreported. And if you are taking illicit funds from Mexico and going into Guatemala and exchanging into quetzal, that is, you can use that either going back to the money laundering process as the placement, as, say you have these illicit pesos, you can then introduce it into the financial system by purchasing quetzal, or any other foreign currency. It also can act as a layering. This is, if you do this enough times, if you change the currency, enough times, it just becomes unwieldy to track because you're going across multiple countries, multiple jurisdictions. You can lose the trace really quickly when you use these currency exchanges. And when we get into some of the examples later on, currency exchanges definitely play a big role there. I would say the second, probably most common one, this might actually be the most common, it's just they're not always reported, is structuring, or kind of slang for it is smurfing. Yeah. And this is, it's a funny name, but the idea comes for anyone who watched the Smurfs, basically taking one and dividing it into many smaller ones. And that's the idea here, that a lot of countries have a limit of, the United States has 10,000 US dollars. Other countries have similar limits on how much money you can put into a bank account or exchange. And if you go over that limit, you trigger what's called a suspicious action report, where basically banks have to, or financial institutions have to flag it and report it. And so in order to avoid being reported, criminal organizations will just basically, maybe they'll take like a $1 million chunk of revenue and then break that up into, let me do the math. What is that? 100 different deposits of $10,000 each. And maybe across different financial institutions as a way to basically break up that lump sum and make it look like many smaller sums. And that's a way to, another way, it's I would say probably most often used in the placement phase. And it also kind of doubles as a layering tactic as well. Front companies and fraudulent invoices. That's a common one where, a drug trafficking organization will set up a storefront maybe that sells washing machines, and they'll write invoices saying, okay, John Smith bought a washing machine today. it's drug revenue coming in, but they're basically covering it up as washing machines or whatever. Pick your durable good.
I've heard restaurants and dry cleaners tend to be quite popular for this kind of thing.
So so bars, restaurants, laundromats, especially laundromats, because anything that's really cash intensive, it's a little easier because when people come to investigate, when they come to audit, it's more plausible to say, well, we don't have credit card receipts because it's all done in cash. So it's harder to check to double check the story. So you're right.
Yeah, laundromat's quite funny. Years ago, I had to organise some filming in a laundromat, and we looked at like 20 of them, and it was a real mission just to get permission to film in one of them. And most of them were all owned by one person on a mobile phone, with a heavy East End Cockney accent. You can imagine it.
Yeah, that must have been an adventure filming in a laundromat. And yeah, just lots of probably loose change and bills laying over the place, and not the most professionally run organizations probably. So another tactic I think similar to the front companies are setting up shell companies and offshore accounts. This is where you see accounts popping up in the Bahamas or I think like Isle of Man is a common one in the UK, isn't that right?
Yes, the Isle of Man, and I think Guernsey as well is another one, but definitely the Isle of Man.
Yeah, that's right. So anything that kind of is under a different, has a different set of laws when it comes to privacy and banking, those jurisdictions will take advantage of that by basically allowing people to store their money there, and it's hard to track. Finally, I think the most interesting one is trade-based money laundering, and there's definitely some good examples to talk about with this one. But that's where the basic idea is, let's say you're a drug organization in the United States, and your business partners in Colombia are shipping you cocaine, you're selling it in the United States. They need a way to get that cash back to Colombia to basically pay the providers. Instead of, there are all sorts of challenges with sending that cash back. One way they've done it in the past is to take the cash, the revenue from the drug sales, purchase durable goods. So maybe cars, refrigerators, washing machines, you name it, and then ship that back to Colombia, sell it on the local market, and then the criminal organizers basically collect the revenue. So it's a way to basically traffic, or it's a way to send illicit funds back via perfectly legal, unsuspecting cargo, electronics and things like that. And there are actually a few examples of criminal organizations making money off of that. So I think one important point in all of these tactics is that most of these are money-losing operations. If you're talking about illicit currency exchanges, usually those exchanges will take some money off the top, especially if you're dealing in large amounts of money. If you're smurfing, you're going to have to pay runners to go out and actually deposit all this money. Front companies and shell companies require all these legal fees. Trade-based money laundering, you're basically investing that money in this on the face of it at least ostensibly legitimate trade, and there are examples of criminal organizations making money off of the actual money laundering process. So that's why this one is so interesting. It's also, I think, where legitimate companies and businesses are most likely to get caught up into this, because if you're selling refrigerators or cars or washing machines to these criminal organizations, or if these criminal organizations are using your shipping company or freight forwarder to do this, you are basically implicated in these crimes, and there's liability there. So it's where there's overlap between the criminal and legitimate business world. And that's where it's, the trade-based money laundering is where it's most likely to happen.
Yeah. Can you give us some examples of case studies you've looked at where these kind of things have been going on?
Yeah. So for a caveat, most of these examples that I've been looking at are coming out of the United States. So apologies to those international listeners out there, but that's where my focus is. And actually looking, I think as I was preparing for this and I wrote this series of analyses on money laundering, one thing that actually, it surprised me, and then once you take a step back and think about it, it's not that surprising. Some of the biggest anti-money laundering cases in the United States in the past 2 or 3 years have involved West African internet scams targeting victims in the United States. So I think everyone's familiar with this concept. These emails that come in, whether it's, a Nigerian prince or asking for some sort of, loan or saying I'm going to pay you and then you'll pay me, I'll pay you back. And all these scams that are online, a lot of these come out of West Africa, specifically Nigeria. And so if you think about it, these, the money is, a lot of times they're posing as someone who is in the United States. So the victim who's in the United States, but it could also be anywhere, Canada, UK, Europe, Australia, they target everyone. The victim forwards the money to the designated bank account. It's gone because it's a scam. They don't get their service. They don't get it back. But then the crime has been committed. So that money that's illicit money. Then those Nigerian or West African criminal groups have basically cells based in the United States, individuals in the United States who are basically, their job is just to open dozens of bank accounts in the United States where they can collect the money. And then it's their job to figure out how to get that money back to West Africa. And that's where we see all these tactics come into play, where you have people, either the illicit money exchange, where they're exchanging the US dollars into Nigerian naira, in the process of getting it back to Nigeria. You've got trade-based money laundering, where people are they're buying, a lot of times it was cars. They would buy cars and then ship the cars to Nigeria where they were sold, and then the money would then go up to the organizers. But yeah, that was cases in August 2019, March 2020, February 2021. We're talking about upwards of $55 million in illicit funds. And these operations go on for years. I mean, the one that was most recently broken up in February 2021, that was $55 million stolen over the course of 7 years.
Yeah.
So, they were able to operate for a long time and obviously make a lot of money off of it. I think it's interesting to note that in these cases where you had West African internet scams or West African based internet scams targeting U.S. citizens, when you had these law enforcement investigations, they usually would arrest dozens of individuals, up to 80 people who were involved in the money laundering side of things. And yet it's important to remember that the people who are actually committing the crime, who are organizing the scams, are still at large in Nigeria or Ghana or wherever they are in West Africa. So these scams will continue. It'll be obviously a disruption to their operations, but they'll find new people in the U.S. who can continue the money laundering side of things. And so yeah, they're basically replaceable. They're kind of like money mules. It causes disruptions, but it certainly doesn't stop the business. One more point I'll make is that, getting back to the trade-based money laundering tactic. So I think probably one of the more sophisticated money laundering operations we've seen in recent years came out in September of 2020, where they arrested 5 people, all of Chinese descent, who were using trade-based money laundering to launder tens of millions of dollars in illicit drug revenue from the United States to Mexico. So fairly basic, standard trade-based money laundering operation, except the wrinkle was they were moving it through China. So they would buy durable goods in the United States, move it to China, sell it there, take the money, buy more durable goods, and then move it to Mexico. And so it was basically an extra step. And that's, it basically makes it harder to investigate because you have one more step in the process. You have one more jurisdiction. Yeah. And as we all know, China isn't cooperating with the United States. They're not in the best of terms right now. Yeah. So you've got that, you're kind of taking advantage of that political rivalry. And they were making money off of this. They were basically using the illicit drug revenue to invest in a trans-Pacific trade business. And so didn't get into specifics as far as what they were trafficking or, what they were purchasing and exporting, but, they were vague about it, electronics and durable goods and things like that. But, this that this involved probably companies and brand names that we've all heard of. And, you think about the risk reputation of those companies if it came out that their products were used to move millions of dollars in drug money.
Well, let's talk a bit about new technology and how that's benefited criminals, because that's been a huge game changer in many respects, hasn't it?
So I hesitate to say that it's been a big game changer. It is definitely offering new opportunities to criminal groups.
Okay.
And I would say that so first the three, I think, ways that technology has helped criminals conduct money laundering is, first of all, you have the rise in person-to-person money transfer platforms. It's like Google Pay, Venmo, things like that, where it's just you can kind of make these. You can pay people directly through electronic means. You have cryptocurrencies. And I think, Bitcoin has been in the news a lot recently with the two big ransomware attacks in the United States against Colonial Pipeline and then the Brazilian meatpacking company. So that's a way that criminal groups can bring in revenue is through cryptocurrencies. And then encrypted communications, we'll talk about this later, but basically is a way for criminal groups to coordinate and organize money laundering. It makes the whole process just more efficient with encrypted communications. So yeah, these I think it's important to note that cash is still predominantly the medium for criminal activity. Cash is absolutely still essential, but these other technologies, these other platforms, the way I see it is that they provide more opportunities in the layering stage of money laundering. That if let's say you've got your illegally obtained U.S. dollars, and if you move it into Great British pounds and then euro and then into cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Ethereum, that's just one more step of the process that makes it harder to track. And the person-to-person money transfer platforms make it easier to smurf, to basically break up a large amount into smaller amounts. And then of course, encrypted communications basically just help criminals organize all this. It helps for them to be able to get together to lay out plans for money laundering and then execute increasingly complicated money laundering schemes.
Yeah, because communication, especially internationally, is going to be king, isn't it?
Yeah, and knowing who to trust, who you're dealing with, where to meet, the specific terms of how much money are you talking about, how will it be delivered, where will it be delivered, all these details. Obviously, if you're just putting it out there in the open, you run the risk of being intercepted. So having encrypted communications allows them to do this all basically under the cover of secrecy.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose one random question. Prior to those sort of encrypted communications, what kind of tactics were gangs using to communicate with one another, especially on an international level? If
you want to go way back, phones, basically. I think the pager and the payphone probably dominated maybe in the 80s and 90s. And that of course could be intercepted as well. And if you establish patterns and were able to intercept phone conversations, but I think the new generation of encrypted communications, and whether that's like WhatsApp or Telegram or even iMessage or some other more advanced services that we'll talk about later. First of all, they allow to have kind of open channels of communication. You can kind of talk back and forth in real time. You can have multiple people in on a conversation, so it's not just one-on-one. It can be however many people you want, up to 100 people or whatever. And a lot of these services advertise themselves as encrypted, secure, private. There are plenty of examples that suggest they aren't actually that secure. But when you're talking about a lot of these are free services, it's the convenience and they're cheap and the efficiencies they create. It has attracted a lot of criminal actors.
If you're struggling with alcohol or drugs, Recovery Centers of America can help. The holidays are over, the new year is here, and the time to act is now. Expert private care at Recovery Centers of America will get you on the road to recovery today. At our award-winning and fully accredited treatment centers on the Eastern Shore and in Southern Maryland, you will be treated with compassion, dignity, and respect by our dedicated team of professionals. You will also benefit from specialized programs, 24-hour medical care, and the comfort of our outstanding facilities. Let us help you. We will answer your call 24/7 and can get you into treatment as soon as today. If outpatient care is right for you, you can receive a same-day assessment and attend therapy in person or virtually. And because we accept most private insurance plans, you get premium care without the premium price. Don't wait. Start your new year. Start your new life today. Call 1-888-RECOVERY now. That's 1-888-RECOVERY.
On the subject of encrypted communications, information has just come through about a huge FBI sting operation that's recently wrapped up called Operation Trojan Shield. Can you talk to us about that operation and all the things that you know?
Yes. So Operation Trojan Shield is great insight into this world of encrypted communications that we were talking about. And actually, before I jump into the details on Trojan Shield, I think just to bring everyone up to speed, I think most people are probably familiar with kind of mainstream encrypted chat platforms like WhatsApp, iMessage, Telegram, Signal. I know I use WhatsApp and iMessage multiple times a day to keep in touch with people. And these are all encrypted. The idea is that they're private to an extent. I think if they're like I said, there are examples of if obvious criminal activity is happening on WhatsApp, police can go to Facebook which owns WhatsApp and say, hey, we need to see the records on this account, and they can get them. There's a deeper world of encrypted messaging services that come at a much higher cost and offer much higher levels of security. Yeah. And these are basically encrypted messaging services that are the technology behind them isn't necessarily all that different from a WhatsApp or an iMessage, but they are coming on their own separate device. Usually it's they'll take like a Samsung handset, strip it down, remove the camera, remove the microphone, take out the GPS, any kind of extra features that could unnecessarily compromise the phone. Take all that stuff out. The phone will have one purpose, and that purpose is to host this encrypted chat channel where the individual can use it to talk to other people on that same service. So this is, obviously several orders of magnitude more complicated and secure than a platform like WhatsApp. So you've had companies that have come and gone that have operated in this field. Some of them market to business executives and celebrities, basically saying like, you need secure communications. This is it. But criminal actors have also found them very useful, and in some cases have been the primary buyers. And to be clear, these are very expensive services. We're talking, maybe several $1,000s for the phone, and then maybe $1,000 a month for the service.
Oh,
so,
wow. Okay, yeah.
I think first of all, it costs a lot of money to operate your own encrypted chat platform. You have to have the servers and the networks all set up. I think also there's probably to a degree just keeping it exclusive. One feature of these services, they're relatively small. If you look at like a WhatsApp or a Telegram, you're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of users. That's not what these encrypted chat providers want. They want to keep things pretty small and exclusive so that they don't attract the attention of law enforcement and basically kind of stay discreet, stay under the radar. But they're still able to make a lot of money. They're based on the cost of the service. And over the past 5 years, we've seen several of these companies shut down. So I think the first one that really made waves was Phantom Secure back in 2018. That was a Canadian-based company. And then EncroChat, which was run out of France, shut down in 2020. Earlier this year, Sky Global was shut down. And all of these basically use the same model, the stripped down phone with a single app on it.
Yeah.
So that's what brings us to Trojan Shield. And Trojan Shield actually starts, it's a fascinating story. It starts with the arrest of Phantom Secure CEO Vincent Ramos back in 2018. Basically the FBI, they suspect that Phantom Secure is selling phones to criminals, basically facilitating criminal activities. They arrest the owner of the company, Vincent Ramos. The service is shut down. A few months later, the FBI finds one of the lead guys behind the technology, and they catch him in San Diego. He's in the process of basically building the replacement to Phantom Secure. He's building a new app and designing it to go on handsets called Anom, A-N-O-M, I think short for anonymous. And he basically is in the process of developing this and setting up his own company. The FBI goes to talk to him. They obviously have some leverage. They flip him, and he becomes a confidential human source. When now he's working for the FBI confidentially. So they tell him, listen, go ahead with this. Go ahead with Anom, but we want you to insert some code into the phone where everything is secure, everything's locked down, except every message that one of your criminal clients sends on this phone, we want it to send a copy to a server that we control. So starting in 2019, they start rolling these phones out. Essentially, it's a huge honey trap. Each one of these phones is marketed as a highly secure, highly private line of communication. It's actually just it's a direct line to the FBI. But the confidential human source, he's not only tech savvy, he knows how to build these phones. He also has a pretty robust network of clients, so he's able to seed these phones out. Over the course of 2 years, he gets 11,000 users around the world who are using this phone. And the FBI and other law enforcement agencies around the world ultimately collect 20 million messages sent through the network. Yeah, pretty much exclusively criminals. And so we're looking at the number keeps going up, but I think last I checked it was about 1,000 arrests linked to intelligence gained from Operation Trojan Shield, seizure of tens of tons of drugs. I think the Australian police claimed that they were able to, or actually one of the reasons the Australian police said they ended up shutting down the operation because they were starting to intercept messages of planned physical attacks and murders. And so they basically shut it down. They stopped those. So, a hugely successful police operation that was made possible by this encrypted chat feature. So basically this holy grail of encrypted communication, criminals have been increasingly relying on over the past few years. Law enforcement was able to basically intercept that and get a direct line to these criminal organizations and monitor them directly for several years. So I think it's a great example of the technology's double-edged sword. That yes, it helps these criminal groups facilitate all sorts of criminal activities, but it also presents huge vulnerabilities and ways for law enforcement to creatively insert themselves and monitor and ultimately make arrests and shut down these operations.
Encrypted communications is such an interesting kind of topic because when the Snowden revelations came out, was it 2013? There was a big push suddenly for ordinary people. They wanted to suddenly encrypt everything. And then on top of that, you had technology companies who started to get a bit nervous about their image of cooperating with the law enforcement. And it led to, I think it was Apple refusing to help the FBI unlock a phone of a potential terrorist and all sorts of crazy things. So yeah, you're right. It really is a sort of double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you just laid out the timeline beautifully. I think this really, you look at 2013, obviously encrypted communications were around before then, but it's the Snowden revelations really kind of brought into light the 2015 debate. It was the San Bernardino attack. The FBI was pressuring Apple to unlock one of the attacker's phones, and there's a very public debate over basically the value of doing that versus maintaining privacy. Ultimately, the government won in that case, and they compelled Apple to help open up the phone. But I agree. It's a fascinating debate, and I think coming down to, on a macro level, I generally think that encrypted communications is good because when it comes down to it, the vast majority of messages that are going back and forth are for legitimate legal means. And if you think about our last conversation where we were talking about industrial espionage, this is exactly the kind of thing you need in order to mitigate or prevent industrial espionage from happening. So encrypted communications, I think, in the grand scheme of things, ultimately there are more good than harm. But then obviously, you do have, it makes investigations harder. And when you think about making an investigation more expedient, yes, it would be nice for them just to be able to get into a phone and see those messages or pictures or whatever immediately. And that's a trade-off, investigative expediency versus kind of a larger, more secure environment. So I think I'd come down more on the side of I think more privacy is probably ultimately better for security, but then obviously you're going to have your examples where that's the exception.
Of course. I mean, if law enforcement have go through proper warrant procedures and there's a healthy relationship between sort of private technology firms and law enforcement, in the end, it probably shouldn't present a major problem for law enforcement, really. But and they do. I mean, companies like Facebook and Apple and Twitter, I mean, they have very strong relationships with law enforcement agencies, assuming everything goes through the proper channels. The requests are put in, it follows the process. I think the issue that was at play in this 2015 case is that the immediacy of it. Basically, the FBI was saying, listen, we got this guy's phone. We need to get into it in case there's another attack in the works, and we need to get into it now. And then I think it took 2 or 3 months for the process to work itself out. And so the FBI is saying, well, if something had happened during that time, that would have been a missed opportunity. Well, and potentially blood on the hands of the technology company.
Yes.
Because from what I saw from the outside, Apple's defense effectively was they were just trying to appeal to people, to their market, so to speak, to say that, look, we're not just giving away your data, and they didn't want to expose a vulnerability in their coding, I think, on the phone. I think they were trying to claim that they couldn't unlock it, I think is what they were trying to say, weren't they?
And I think, Apple's defense, it was very interesting because they made it so public, right? That it wasn't just a private conversation they were having with the FBI. They went out of their way to really make this very public, to make this kind of to showcase their commitment to privacy, probably informed by the Snowden revelations just 2 years prior, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, and I'll betray my own biases here, but I think one of the issues I have with it is that you look at right now, for example, the U.S., past few years, the U.S., UK, Australia have all been basically, to some extent, putting regulations and restrictions on the use of Huawei and other Chinese technology equipment because they say these companies are basically in bed with the Chinese government, and they allow the Chinese government access to critical infrastructure, into our networks, allow them to spy on us. Yes, I also have that concern. At the same time, or just a few years prior to that, the FBI was basically asking Apple to give them a backdoor so that they could investigate cases. And I see those two as very similar. Those are basically, it's the U.S. accusing China of doing what the U.S. wants to do. And obviously, it's global politics, like double standards abound. But I think, it's hard just to say to pick a side because, it's a lot of gray. But I think I tend to say I'd rather just have, encryption and privacy across the board because ultimately I think the world's a more secure place if you have protected communications. And yes, there will be criminal organizations that will take advantage of that. There will be terrorist attacks that take advantage of that. But ultimately, I think those pose a much smaller risk than, basically providing international or international networks for espionage or basically compromising entire networks to government surveillance. Yeah.
Just back on financial crime, can you talk to us a bit about the threat financial crime poses to legitimate business operations? Because that's a problem, isn't it?
So yeah, as I mentioned before, trade-based money laundering, I think, is probably one of the biggest threats because that's where you have that overlap between criminal organizations and money laundering and legitimate companies. I think, if you look at anti-money laundering operations, whether it's the US or UK, all of them, I've looked at the cases, all of them target banks or financial institutions. So it's always basically the governments are putting the onus on banks and financial institutions to know their clients, to monitor the transactions that are going on within their banks, and to flag suspicious activity and report it so that authorities can investigate it and make sure that it's prosecute if it's criminal. Banks and banks are responding to this by increasingly by putting in more security measures, by I think cracking down on money laundering operations, and I think this has pushed criminals out to diversify and use more tactics. If you look at, maybe 10 or 11 years ago, you had several huge cases with Standard Chartered Bank, with Wells Fargo, where they were caught, helping Mexican drug cartels launder tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. They were punished for that. They paid fines for that and took hits to their reputations as well. So I think, banks are getting the message, and they are avoiding suspicious business if they think that it brings in this risk of being labeled as supporters of money laundering. So I think as a result, that pushes criminals, again, to diversify. And I think one place they could diversify is into non-financial institutions. And this is where, you get into, unfortunately, there just aren't any examples right now of that happening when it comes to money laundering. But there are plenty of examples of that happening when it comes to trafficking drugs. So basically the first, moving drugs from one country to another, it's when you look at examples of trafficking drugs from Mexico to the United States, for example, very commonly they will pack drugs into shipments of fruit or produce. They prefer produce because of the kind of it's expedited. This idea that we need to get produce through the border quickly because it'll expire. And so there's this idea that it can go through quicker. Sometimes it's known to the company. Maybe sometimes the company actually knows what they're doing and they're actually helping to smuggle drugs using their trucks and their produce. A lot of times they don't know, and someone is intercepting the truck and planting it in the truck, or maybe an employee is working against the company. Either way, this obviously creates a big risk for any company.
Yeah.
There was one interesting example that came out of Operation Trojan Shield where they listed they gave some excerpts from some of the chats that they intercepted. And one of them, I think it was someone in the United States talking to someone in Australia, and they were basically disguising a shipment from Lowe's, which is a big American hardware kind of home furnishing store. they were basically they were using lows as a cover. I think they were saying a bench or something was packed inside this box, and it was actually, I think it was methamphetamine or cocaine. And so they were using the cover of these legitimate companies to ship drugs. And this happens, like I said, this happens on a spectrum of, sometimes it's the company has no idea and no involvement whatsoever, and the criminal actors are just using it as a cover. In which case, I think the company has an interest in at least stopping that to preserve their reputation. But then I think it gets, there also, you could have where the company is more involved, where you might have an employee within the company who's using access to the company and to ship drugs or illicit contraband, or to use their financial system as a way to launder money. And that's something we haven't necessarily seen yet, but I have a feeling, that's something we're going to see in the future is basically regulators going after non-financial companies for facilitating money laundering.
Operation Trojan Horse. One of the communications that I saw in the Vice article, it was it seemed to be a drug group based in Bogota who were using, I think it was French diplomatic envelopes or something. I was wondered, does that mean somebody at the French embassy was working for them, or
that one there really stood out to me too, because I think it's always kind of been understood that diplomatic pouches are used for illegal operations, but usually it's associated with countries like Iran, maybe West African countries that tend to be more associated with criminal activity. So it was kind of surprising to see France, they're using the French diplomatic pouch. To answer your question, yeah, I think it certainly means that someone within the embassy or within the diplomatic mission was working with drug traffickers. I can't imagine drug traffickers would have that kind of access without some sort of inside help. So it would be interesting to see what comes out of that, as far as who, how that worked, who was behind that. But no, I agree. That one stood out to me as well.
No, very interesting, that one. So keep an eye on the French mission in Colombia, or something will come up at some point.
Yeah, I think about diplomatic security and security in embassies. It's not always as I think as robust as maybe we'd like to think it is. And I'll give just another quick personal anecdote. I lived in Ho Chi Minh City several years ago, and we lived in an apartment building we overlooked the U.S. consulate and the French consulate. And you look at the U.S. consulate, and there was of course that ubiquitous wall with tall fence coming off the top of it. Every square inch of the place was lit, floodlighting everywhere. Just it was a very, you could tell it was a very security conscious building. Right next door to it, you had the French consulate, which was actually a pretty historical building. It dated back to the colonial days. I think it was a 19th century building. Total darkness. No idea. You look over there and you had no idea what was going on at night because there were no lights. We heard stories about them finding like snakes in the consulate, and yeah, I mean not to badmouth the French. I'm sure plenty of other missions are guilty of this, but yeah, you don't always have the most robust security within some of these missions. So yeah, I raised my eyebrows, but then that's why I thought about it, and I thought, okay, yeah, no, that's. I'm sure there were a few security lapses there. Yeah,
definitely. Well, I suppose with an organised criminal gang, I mean, if somebody could steal the envelopes and and then put the shipment out of the country via somebody dodgy at airport security, all you need is somebody dodgy at airport security at the other end, don't you, to get it through? But
yeah, and I mean, I don't know how France does it, but usually that's gonna involve someone within the French mission is going to have to hand that off at the airport, maybe even accompany it, on the plane. I suppose it's possible. It's possible that someone could have slipped it in, but that in itself is a huge security lapse. If you have outsiders who have access to your diplomatic pouch and you don't know, it's hard to say which one is more concerning. But either way, there's definitely some problems going on there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for all that. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
So yeah, today we talked about a series of articles I wrote last month on money laundering, and I think it segued and dovetailed nicely with another series of articles I'm writing on crime and technology, and I'll be publishing those over the coming weeks. So please watch out for those. And yeah, I'll be talking about some of the points I made today. So looking at crime and communications, so how they communicate and the vulnerabilities there, as well as marketplaces, how criminal groups are using technology to create new marketplaces. These dark web Tor websites where you can basically buy drugs or lots of other illegal things. And then finally talking about crime and financial mechanisms. So a lot, cryptocurrency, for example, how criminals are using financial technology to pay each other and receive revenue and all that kind of stuff. So stay tuned for those.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. Well, look, Ben, thank you so much for rejoining me today. Where can listeners find out more about you and your work? Yeah, they can go to worldview.stratfor.com. My work and the work of my colleagues is all published there. And we please go visit it and check us out. Fantastic. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for listening. This is Secrets and Spies.
If you're struggling with alcohol or drugs, Recovery Centers of America can help. The holidays are over, the new year is here, and the time to act is now. Expert private care at Recovery Centers of America will get you on the road to recovery today. At our award-winning and fully accredited treatment centers on the Eastern Shore and in Southern Maryland, you will be treated with compassion, dignity, and respect by our dedicated team of professionals. You will also benefit from specialized programs, 24-hour medical care, and the comfort of our outstanding facilities. Let us help you. We will answer your call 24/7 and can get you into treatment as soon as today. If outpatient care is right for you, you can receive a same-day assessment and attend therapy in person or virtually. And because we accept most private insurance plans, you get premium care without the premium price. Don't wait. Start your new year. Start your new life today. Call 1-888-RECOVERY now. That's 1-888-RECOVERY.